Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's sponsored innovation session, Lessons from the Digital Pivot. How did we do? What's next? My name is Caitlin Zachary, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. Closed captioning for this webinar will appear automatically on your screen. If you would like to disable the chat transcript, please click the More icon on the bottom of the Zoom window and hide subtitle. APAP is located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and the Anacostan people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I would like to pay my respect to the Piscataway and Anacostan elders, both past and present. In addition to the Zoom platform, we are also broadcasting today's webinar on Facebook Live. During today's webinar, Zoom participants will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments using the Q&A and chat functions. Unfortunately, we will not be taking questions or comments via Facebook Live. If you have questions, we ask that you submit them using the Q&A box. Today's sponsored innovation session is brought to you by Instant Encore, a US-based technology company powering over 1 million patron experiences every year. Our host for today's webinar is David Dombrowski, Instant Encore's Chief Marketing Officer, who brings over 20 years of experience in arts management and nonprofit technology. David frequently presents on technology trends and best practices for arts organizations, including Arts Reach, National Alliance for Musical Theater, the League of American Orchestras, among many others. David, we're excited to welcome you here today. I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Caitlin. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Caitlin said, my name is David Dombrowski, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Instant Encore. Instant Encore has been around since 2007, and we work with arts and culture organizations to provide first-class experiences for their patrons that increase their frequency of participation and deliver more value from their interactions. We have two primary services that I'll be referencing at different points today. The first is Absention. Absention is our white label mobile app platform for arts and culture organizations that enables them to have their own apps in the app stores. And LiveNote, which enables organizations to deliver content to patrons' mobile devices in real time during events and performances. So for today's session, we're going to take a look at our lessons from the digital pivot. What did we learn? And we're also going to look at some current models of hybrid programming and take a look at how arts organizations are using digital tools to reduce health risks for returning patrons. And I'm going to try and not to be all East Coast and talk too fast. So if I'm talking too fast, y'all let me know. So what did we learn from the digital pivot? So last year in March, when everything went into lockdown, there was a lot of debate going on in terms of what do we do? Do we start doing digital programming? Do we shift everything to that? And Andrew Racinos, who is the CEO for Tessitura Network, he identified 4 groupings or 4 camps in the digital content debate at the time. We have originalists, or we had originalists. I think a lot of them have shifted now. So originalists, they feel that streaming performances are a poor substitute for the live event, and they appreciate but also mourn the necessity of needing to do digital programming. Then in another camp, the second one, we had forerunners, and these were folks who believed in the value of streaming performances prior to COVID, and they actually put money into it. They invested part of their budget into that. And they were the first out of the gate with new content when that came around. So it was interesting for us to see which of our clients were immediately pivoting to digital and finding quick ways to do it. And the ones who had invested in it previously had already laid the infrastructure for that. Then the third camp he identified were lift and shifters. I have to say that very distinctly. Um, so these folks, this was the largest contingent of our industry in early 2020. So they recognized the need to stay in the public eye, but they did not invest heavily in digital pre-pandemic. And so they were scrambling to basically lift their content that they had and shift it to a digital space. And then the fourth camp were evolutionaries. And these were artists and organizations who were reimagining their art forms specifically for digital delivery. And they were creating new work that was specifically and solely intended for digital distribution. So these were the four camps that we had when Andrew published this in May of last year. So at that beginning time, we saw so much free digital content. It was just a tidal wave of digital content. And you know, that wave never really stopped. We just really raised the level of the water at that over the past year. So free digital content, it took different forms. Um, so like, for example, here with Rockport, they were doing full performances that they were offering for free. And other folks, they did actual live streams that were, you know, interactive. This one from Faulkner Performing Arts is great. So they did the acoustic interpretations contest, and people were able to vote in real time for the winners. And then they were able also to watch a live stream performance with the winner. So it was all great all around. Other folks turned to creating episodic content, as we can see here with Austin Opera. And that content varied so dramatically across the board. Some folks were doing the Levitts. They were doing Levitt in Your Living Room series. Others were doing interviews with artists to keep artists and organizations and fans connected. And then others were going in completely different directions. I believe it was the Stratford Festival up in who they created a cooking show that was all about the meals that they would have eaten back in Shakespeare's time. So it was really interesting to see just how people would shift and pivot and evolve and change to keep people engaged and to stay connected. And not all of the content was visual and video in nature. There were folks who were releasing, you know, audio programming as well. Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, here's an example of that. So we have all of this free digital content going around in 2020, and we still do today in 21. I mean, who doesn't remember all of those mosaic videos, right? But there was a growing feeling that the pandemic would last a year or longer. So organizations started exploring ways to potentially monetize their digital content to generate revenue. So TRG Arts, they surveyed 104 organizations across the United States and Canada. And this was in 2020. And one of the questions they asked them was, do you plan to introduce or have you introduced paid digital programming in 2020? And among those 104 organizations, 78% indicated that they had. And for those who had implemented digital programming in 2020, they went on to ask them, you know, when could patrons view? Were you doing it only on demand? Was this all archival stuff that you're bringing in and allowing to be streamed? Was it a mix? Were you doing live streams that you were also then later allowing folks to view on demand? Or were you limiting it solely to live streams? And here we can see that 60% were doing on demand only, whereas 18% were doing live streams only, and then 22% were doing a mix of both. I think if we were to redo that survey now, I think we would see that that live and on-demand cohort would be much larger than it was at the time. So why did they do it? When TRG asked them, the number one reason that these organizations were doing it was to stay tethered or connected to their subscribers, as well as their donors. What was interesting though is where you see like retained subscriber revenues and where you also see then the difference in Canadian and US responses around growing the audience base for single ticket buyers. I thought it was really interesting how the Canadian audience, over with 56% of those organizations, identified that as an important factor, whereas only 36% of US organizations identified it as such. Then toward the end of 2020, Theater Mania surveyed 3,300 members of their online community and published the Patrons Perspective report through Audience View, which is their parent company. And the report came out in January of 2021. And they looked at of those 3,300, getting a sense of who they were talking to. 70% of their survey respondents were over the age of 60, and 94% attended theater twice or more per year during or pre-COVID, so 2019 and earlier. On average, digital audiences, they were looking at, have you watched any online streaming content since COVID began? And of course, we expected that to be a large number. 77% had. And then they asked, have you enjoyed watching these virtual events? Going back to that whole originalist thing where they felt that, you know, digital is a poor substitute for live. So they were looking at what level of satisfaction did people have when they were viewing these things. And of course, there are a lot of factors that could tie into that. You know, it could be when did they watch it during the pandemic? How chomping at the bit were they to stay connected with the world? You know, there are a whole lot of factors that go into that. But looking at sentiment, you know, only 2.4% said that no, they did not enjoy watching virtual events or streaming content. So they asked if you've paid for virtual events and streaming content since March of 2020. And they did this survey twice. So in May of 2020, you can see here on the left-hand side that only 26.4% indicated that they had paid. Whereas now when we look at the results from December of 2020, we can see that 64.5% had paid to view virtual events or streaming content. And again, remember that the majority, 70% of the people responding to this were in an older demographic. So the idea that older patrons aren't going to watch digital programming doesn't fly. So as organizations started announcing plans to shift their 2021 seasons toward digital programming, JCA Arts Marketing, they launched a study of early digital audience behavior. And then they launched a second variation on that. So they were kind of looking at it in growth stages. So the first one they were looking at is really kind of a birthing stage. And then the second report is really looking at what kind of that growth stage in development. So they got data from 2 performing arts centers, 3 regional theaters, 2 ballet companies, and 3 classical music organizations who had been offering paid digital content over the past year. And they compared that. So these streamed online performances were from October 1st through February 28th of 2021. And they compared that data with all in-person patrons data since 2015. So they were comparing online viewing to in-person attendance. So they looked at the relationship of the buyers to the organization. So when we looked at the folks who purchased digital tickets to events or digital programming, we saw that 32% were new to file. These were people who had only ever interacted with the organization through digital performances. We also saw that, so that was an interesting thing, thinking about how folks were not really thinking in the US, were not really thinking about these performances as bringing in single ticket buyers. They weren't really thinking about growing that base. And yet they found that almost a third of the folks who are purchasing those digital and virtual events, they're only interacting with the organization, or have only to this point, only interacted with them digitally. And then we see 30% are coming from subscribers, and 25% from multi-ticket buyers, and 13% from folks who had purchased single tickets for in-person events. So interestingly enough, you might expect that subscribers would constitute the majority of someone's digital content. You might think that they're the most highly invested in that relationship, and so of course they're going to be viewing them there. But it's a fraction, it's about a third. And then we looked at what kind of revenue were they bringing in. So when they looked at that, they saw that even though a third of the folks who had purchased tickets to digital events, a third of them had only interacted with the organization digitally, that 30% only constituted 19% of the revenue coming in. So we're seeing that these organizations are indeed paying, or these patrons are paying a little less than some of the other patrons, because a lot of these organizations were doing pay what you can, or and so they were allowing for scalability, and they found that their subscribers were stepping up. Their subscribers counted as 40% of the revenue that they brought in, and their multi-ticket buyers stepped up. So when we look at across the board, 60%, that's how much the average amount paid for a digital performance was versus an in-person performance for the previous 6 years. So you're looking at 60% is what they paid. And if we look at how much that was, so if you looked across all of these organizations, the average in-person ticket was $64, and the average digital ticket was $38. So 30% of digital audience members had attended more than one digital performance since April of 2020. So that means that 70% of the folks were one and dones. They came in, they saw one performance, and that was it. And then 30% of them were attending multiple digital performances. So what that indicates to me, though, is that there's definitely room here to cultivate your digital audience and get them to come back, just as you would for your in-person audience. So with all of this happening over the past year, we started seeing a rise of both hybrid seasons and hybrid performances even. So when I say hybrid, what I mean by hybrid is that there's an in-person live component and there's a digital component going on to either the season or the programming. So for example, with the Lied Center from Nebraska, here we see that they have an interesting thing going on here. This actually, the Sam Stacy performance is a dual. It's both, it's hybrid. You can attend it in person and get tickets, or you can watch it on Facebook Live. So they're going in both directions for that specific performance. Now, some organizations are doing more of a hybrid season where specific events are designated as in person, others are designated as virtual or live streaming events. And then others like the Lied are doing those, but they're also doing this hybrid model too, where they're doing individual performances that are both in person and digital. So it's leading to some really interesting questions. I mean, so they're on Go to Facebook Live, and the question is, am I paying for that, or am I watching it for free? And that brings in all the questions that people have had over the years of, is digital programming going to cannibalize our in-person audience? Now, we're at a really interesting point in time, right? Because we are coming into the part of the pandemic where the majority of us are starting to get vaccinated or have been vaccinated. And that's leading to some incentives for people to want to attend live events again. And yet psychologically, some of us are still in that space where we're like, yeah, I can't be around a lot of people yet. Like we haven't mentally prepared ourselves to be in crowds. So there's going to be some time, I think, where hybridity is necessary for maintaining your connections with your audience. Because we're going to have people who are slow to warm up to the idea of coming back to in person. And on the flip side, you're going to have people who are craving live events. And so it's going to be a bit of a mix going on for a while. Now, an interesting thing going on with Paper Mill Playhouse, they did a subscriber only season. So the idea here was that you would subscribe to the digital performances, and that's part of your subscription. With your subscription, you get access to all of the digital and streaming performances. You also, as a subscriber, when conditions prevailed and you could attend socially distanced performances indoor, then you had the option of doing that. So you could go as a subscriber and secure a ticket for in-person, or you would always have access to the digital. And I thought that was a very interesting way of approaching it. Another approach that we saw, this one was from the American Conservatory Theater. So they offered season packages that were also a hybrid, which is interesting. So they had 3 packages. You could go in the all-in package, which gave patrons priority access to all in-venue and streamed performances. And for those patrons who weren't yet ready to return for in-person events, they could tap into ACT's digital offerings through a virtual-only subscription that they called an Anywhere membership. And then, some patrons didn't want to or couldn't stream programming, and for them, they had an in-person subscription option as well. What was interesting is that over 70% of the folks who subscribed for the season went for the all-in package. And in thinking about hybrid seasons where folks may have tickets to virtual events or as well as tickets to in-person events, for us at Instant Encore, we started thinking about our clients and how we can help keep things clear for their patrons. Over the past year, Tessitura has added some gated digital content modules so that folks have the ability to provide ticketed digital content. But that means that I have a ticket for digital content, I may have a ticket for an in-person event. And so we worked over the past year to integrate with Tessitura's module to do that, but also to make it very clear in our clients' mobile apps whether or not the event that you have purchased ticket for is digital only, or if you actually have a physical ticket. And for the Alliance Theater, that was a really important thing so that their fans could, quickly see what they have in terms of digital content, what they have in physical tickets. And with the rise of all of this digital content, I found for our clients that push notifications became super important. So we had this huge deluge of digital content over the past year, and it's still happening. I'm getting the emails from Musical America, the League, and all of these places that are showing me the list of all the live streams that are coming up. So there's a ton of digital content going on, and everybody's vying for attention to let people know that it's happening. But I have COVID brain right now. I've got this pandemic memory going on. So if you send me an email at 8 o'clock in the morning for a show at 8 o'clock that night, I'll be honest, the chances are highly likely I'm not going to remember that. But if you send me a notification on my phone 2 minutes before you go live, well, that's a whole other story. And so we saw a dramatic uptick in the number of our clients who were using push and the number of pushes that they were sending out. And there was also a variability in how they were using it. So yes, they were delivering people or guiding them toward their live streams, but they were also using it for encouraging micro giving campaigns and encouraging donations throughout the year, letting people know about their open status, whether or not that they've reopened. If they did reopen, did they have to shut down again? For those who shifted to outdoor programming, they needed to have a way to provide folks with weather alert information to let them know about whether or not these programs are still going to take place on the day. A lot of people often say, yeah, but nobody opts in for notifications. Everybody just hits dismiss. In 2019, we looked at 7 of our clients, and we were looking at them for a number of different reasons and to assess how well things were going for them. The 7 clients that we looked at here were Bass Hall, Overture Center for the Performing Arts, San Diego Symphony, Seattle Symphony, Straz Center, Tennessee Performing Arts Center, and Ticket Omaha. In 2019, those 7 organizations had over 100,000 opt-ins for push notifications. And across all of our clients, we see an average opt-in rate of 55 to 60%. And those organizations who clearly communicate how they intend to use notifications immediately on the welcome screen when someone downloads their app, they see higher rates. I've seen rates as high as 78%. So thinking about going back or reopening for folks who haven't, we're looking at how can digital tools help reduce the health risk, because the digital pivot wasn't just online looking at content. The digital pivot was happening on site too, with things that we had normally done in a printed or a physical manner. We're now shifting into ways of exploring and doing them digitally. So TRG, again, as you'll recall, they surveyed 104 organizations in Canada and the United States. And here they were asking them when they plan to reopen their primary venues for in-person performances. And you can see here how in the US, the majority, 55%, are looking at the back half of the year, Q3, through July 1 through December 31st. I thought it was interesting how the majority in Canada were looking at Q1 and Q2 though. So as we're starting to think about that, everybody's starting to think about how they're going to address folks coming back in and how they're going to address those risks. Last year in August, we had Atlanta Opera approached us and they said, so listen, we're going to put a tent up on the ball field at a local university, and we're going to stage opera here. And we know, they brought together a group of folks like epidemiologists and other health professionals who helped them kind of craft their protocols for reopening in this outdoor space. And one of the things they told them that they needed to do was that they needed to have audience members take a health screening on the day of the event so that they could indicate whether or not, or get a sense of if anyone is predisposed toward having COVID or at risk for having COVID. And what they wanted is they wanted them to take the survey and then to have their results appear in the app as a check or an X mark that they could show at the door. We worked together. We had a short period of time to do it, but we worked together to make it happen. So for them, on the days that they have events that have a health check or screening or survey associated with them, folks go into their app, they can access the survey from a card on the home screen or through a navigation item in the menu structure. And it takes them to the survey. They go through and they answer questions that we have all been answering and hearing for the past year. So they're nothing new that you haven't heard or seen before. And people complete the survey and they really have two results. They can pass, and here they have customizable text, of course, and it stores the results in the app for the entire day. So if you're doing something that's kind of a spaced out festival format where folks were going from one place in the morning to another place in the afternoon and another in the evening, for folks that were doing that, they only had to take it once. They didn't have to take it every time, and it was stored in the app and they could just show it whenever they needed to. Of course, the other option on the table is they can, oh, sorry, one more thing. They could also share it with other people who are coming with them. And they could share it through text or email, social media, whatever platform they were using. Now, they can also fail the test. And if they fail the test, of course, this text is customizable. So organizations have the ability to determine exactly what language they want to use here, what messaging, what behavior they want to prompt. And Atlanta wanted to take it a little bit further. So Atlanta, they have their CRM and ticketing company is Tessitura, and our Absention platform happens to integrate with Tessitura. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to connect the health screening to the ticket so that when someone went into the app to access their mobile tickets, they would be prompted to take the health check survey. And then upon completing the survey, they would they would give them access to the ticket, and it would also display that the health check had been passed on the ticket. So this is something that they're continuing to use today, and other organizations like Ticket Omaha, Utah Symphony, and others have been picking up as well. So other ways of reducing risk are, it helps to reduce our physical contact points on site. That's a primary tactic. So of course, tickets, digital tickets, they were important before, but they became even more important in the time of COVID. Primarily because they're a touchless experience. I don't have to pass tickets to someone else to scan. I don't have to print out paper and hand that. It's all here, but there are other conveniences. It's, you know, your digital tickets are always in the palm of your hand, and they're fast scanning, and they save money on printing and mailing, and they also help save the planet. And, you know, this is an example from us, but there are other ways of having digital tickets. You know, it can be an email that's sent to you that has a link to the ticket with the barcode, or it could be a ticket that you've added to the wallet on your Apple or Android device. So digital tickets can, they can happen in different ways. This is just an example from our client. But if you don't currently have a digital ticket option for folks, that's a necessity going forward. So in 2019, we looked at those 7 organizations that I mentioned earlier, and we wanted to get a sense of how well pre-COVID folks were adopting mobile tickets. And for those 7 organizations in 2019, they had over 200,000 mobile tickets accessed through their apps. And for 3 of them, Hamilton was a big driver because they wanted to be able to combat scalping. And so they really leaned into their mobile tickets. They eliminated print at home, and they did not mail out tickets to Hamilton in advance. They gave them 2 options. You can come to will call and pick up your ticket, or you can have it delivered to your mobile app. And the reason they did that is because in the mobile app, they were able to determine when the barcode would become available in the app for scanning. So some organizations, they really put in a tight window. They said 2 or 3 hours prior to start time, the barcode will become available. Others started out with a tight window and then eased up on it based on feedback from patrons. So some of them eased up to 12 hours or 24 hours prior to, but it helped a great deal when it came to that particular event and that driver. Of course, with digital tickets and reopening, one of the concerns is how our older patrons going to respond to that. So in September, Utah Symphony and Utah Opera, they opened for socially distanced indoor performances. And they did those from September through November. And then they just reopened for them again about 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they did a lot of surveying because, they knew that there was going to be, a big change to require people to have will call or mobile only. They knew that was going to be a big shift for folks. So they surveyed them to find out how well they responded to that. And here's an example from one of their survey results. A gentleman who's 83 considers himself to be the least techie person you can imagine, and yet was super grateful to be able to access his tickets on his phone. And all it takes is a little customer service. And customer service for this kind of thing doesn't have to be one-to-one. Customer service can mean doing over the shoulder video showing how somebody accesses their ticket through email, through the barcode that through the link on the email, or showing them how they go into Apple Wallet or how they go into your app and access your digital ticket. So just providing that kind of information through email, through website, wherever you have it, is helpful. And that's all it really takes to get people to do it. Another thing that is going to become increasingly important, I think, is ticket sharing. So we've had ticket sharing enabled for a number of our clients for a few years. Ticket sharing, the idea you can see here, there's a send a friend button at the bottom of the ticket. And when a user taps that, now they're able to put in their friend's email address. They can indicate what ticket they want to share with them. And they receive a confirmation screen that the ticket has been sent. Their friend receives an email and it has a link to the ticket with the barcode. Now, of course, it's important to mention that ticket sharing only becomes possible if when the barcode is available. So if you set that to a 2 or 3 hour time frame, that means that you wouldn't be able to share the ticket until 2 or 3 hours prior to the start time. So in 2019, Bass Hall had over 7,800 mobile tickets shared in this manner through their app. And of course, now with the wake of COVID, ticket sharing and the health check survey go hand in hand. So when you share a ticket and someone opens that, there'll be a prompt there for the health check survey. In addition to digital tickets, digital membership cards are important. So if you have membership programs that have a card, you should start investigating ways of digitizing that. There are a lot of ways of doing it, but providing that kind of digital tool will be very helpful. It's also cost effective too. It saves a lot on printing those out and mailing them out, production of them. Another thing to consider in terms of physical touch points are our programs, our printed programs. So we actually have a lot of experience around this with digital programs. Absention has a feature set called At the Venue that's been available for a number of years. In this example, you can see Austin Opera. They're actually using it to provide a program for a virtual concert. And then here's an example of what that At the Venue screen looks like. But it provides the ability to give them an alternative solution to a printed program and to share your program information with them. The other service we have, LiveNote, often gets used in this way as well. So organizations like Pittsburgh Opera will use LiveNote to deliver program notes in real time. And so it becomes an interactive experience that's happening during the performance. Now, we have other folks that we're working with who have some challenges here. They may have equity requirements, actors' equity requirements that need to be fulfilled in their programs. And so over the past few months, we've been working with Mervish Productions on developing a new service that we're calling Inside Guide. And this is a digital program service that we're coming out with this summer, where basically we've looked at program books and playbills and identified different components and elements that are in them, and we're presenting them in an aesthetically pleasing way that people who use mobile platforms are accustomed to. And it also making it easy for management and letting people take control of managing their own ads and all of that kind of stuff. So Inside Guide, that's coming out soon, and actually you'll see an email coming out from us next week about that. Another thing that we ended up doing for our clients last year was making donations easier. So we released the feature of one-tap donations with Apple Pay and Google Pay. To my mind, it's the fastest and easiest way for somebody to give. I mean, you put in the amount to give and you tap the button, and you just verify the transaction and you're done. It's so simple, it's great. So one-tap donations, some organizations are implementing this and they're charging, or some platforms are implementing this and charging a fee to organizations to use that. We don't do that. The only fees associated with one-tap donations is the credit card processing fee. So these are processed through Stripe, and Stripe has a credit card processing fee of about 2.9% plus 30 cents. Stripe, I just found out there last week, also has a nonprofit discount for organizations who contact them. But the good thing about one-tap donations is it's easy management. The funds are donated in your bank account in 48 hours. You can see your transaction history, you can export your transactions, you can initiate refunds. And for our customers who do have Tessitura, we can actually send that data to Tessitura. So I know that we're coming up on the kind of the 45-minute mark here. So just a couple of things that we're thinking about over the next, year and beyond is we're thinking about, we've pushed a lot of people toward this kind of digital engagement. What happens when we get to the point where we're able to have capacity halls? What happens? Do we continue to provide this digital programming? Do we continue to provide it in the same way that we do during this time period? I think we're going to see a lot of exploration and experimentation around that in terms of the models that people are using now and the models they continue to use once we're able to have capacity venues. Another thing that we're thinking about is other ways of leveraging mobile. So things like ticket upgrades or the ability to do paid parking, paid food and beverage, concessions, all of those things, or pre-ordering, all of those things, being able to do those and leveraging things like Apple Pay and Google Pay to do that to make it faster and easier. Those are things we're also thinking about because they'll eliminate other physical touch points on site too. So those are a couple of things, and I want to make sure that I give time for everybody to ask questions. So we're going to move on to the questions part. Here's you can see the link. Slides from today are available for you, so you can go to that link that's there, the bit.ly link. And with that, I will ask Caitlin what kind of questions we have coming in.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and if you have a chance to drop that link in the chat as well, I think a few people have asked me for that. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do want to ask a question, if you could put it in the Q&A box. But just certainly wanted to make a point, tying off of your last statement here, of just how audiences are changing. And we had a person mentioning in the chat that now they are serving audiences that are more national, people who may not have ever been able to physically come into their spaces. So just thinking about even the capacity of a venue now is no longer
limited to their four walls. Yeah.
Correct. So kind of going to go back to the very beginning. You mentioned quite a few ways that people were serving their audiences, again, varied in terms of now the number that they can serve. You mentioned surveys, you mentioned having digital programs, you mentioned not sending out physical mailers. Is there anything else that you might want to mention in terms of how people are using digital to just stay connected to their audiences and tell that story of their organization or tell the story of a performance? You know, we were surprised, from that data, you mentioned being surprised by the members of their audiences who were able to access this digital technology, and it's serving them. They're watching these digital performances. Was there anything specific that some of these venues were doing to reach out to their audiences to stay connected to them during the pandemic?
Oh, sure. I mean, so of course, they're going to their own audiences, and they're going and they're doing their traditional kind of outreach through email, through their Facebook pages, through their Twitter accounts, through all their social media channels, really leveraging those. But they also started to focus on folks beyond their base, right? And that's how they drew in a lot of the new folks who were new to file. So in Capacity Interactive, they talk about this, and I think they actually have a bit of research on their website that you guys can take a look at, where they looked at a particular organization. I think it might have been either the Goodman Theater or Steppenwolf, and they were looking at their outreach that they did through Facebook, advertising, actually, and the impact of their Facebook advertising on bringing in new to file folks. So bringing in folks who had not interacted with them before. And they had a lot of success with that. So I think folks are playing with that. They're looking at what are our ways of connecting with people? How can we leverage that to message appropriately to people we already have relationships with? How do we shift our messaging for folks who we don't have a relationship with? I often talk about, think about the way that you message to people who have never stepped foot in your venue, because sometimes we try to apply the same language that we use when we're talking to somebody who has a relationship with us. And you shouldn't, because that's not the same thing. If you haven't asked, if we haven't shaked hands, don't ask for a kiss, kind of thing. It's like, use different language. But the other thing they found was images. The types of images that people were using were interesting. So, like in the past, we were always talking about showing images of artists interacting with the audience, or showing images of happy audience members, and things like that. And now what we're seeing is people want to see a still from the show, or people want to see an animated GIF from the show, or a little video clip of the show. They want to see what that digital experience is going to look like and what it's going to be like. And the folks who do that in their online advertising are seeing higher upticks in the number of people who are choosing that content. So I think those are important things to think about in terms of how do we change the way we present our information for a digital experience versus an in-person experience.
And to highlight a question we have kind of in the reopening section, you were mentioning using apps for health checks, and
but you don't have to. You don't have to use an app for that. You can use
right.
any standard surveying tool could be used for it. The thing I think that's beneficial about our app is that it stores the results for people, so that if someone takes it in the morning on the day of, say they get a prompt through the email, or maybe they get a push notification reminding them, be sure to take your health check survey before going to the show tonight. They take it in the morning, it stays in the app. But that, you can have Survey Monkey, anybody. You can, Google Forms. You can do whatever you need to do that works for your, your price point and makes sense for you. So any of those tools can be utilized in that way. But what it does is it gives you data. It gives you data that you can say, look, we asked these questions, these were their responses. It helps people who are coming back feel more at ease because they know you're taking this seriously and you really are thinking about their health and safety.
And are you finding that most organizations have had really generous rescheduling policies, or if you fail that health check, how they're still encouraging you to stay connected with them and rescheduling that
Yeah,
ticket or
because
that performance?
I mean, because these are organizations who had to refund a lot of tickets last year. And so that really helped them refine their policy, but it also helped them to be more flexible. Before that, we had some folks who had some very iron-fisted rules around tickets and refunds. And I think having to go through that gauntlet last year has really changed people's perspectives on that. And so, yeah, folks have been much more flexible about, okay, so let's try and book you for a show at a later date, yeah.
And you showed us some of your digital program tools as well as the donation tools. And
Yeah.
there's a question here about monetizing some of the digital programs. Are people still able to incorporate, the advertising or some of the features that they would have had in their paper programs?
Yeah, so like for example, with abstention and the at the venue feature, a lot of folks, they will link out to where their standard program is hosted online on platforms like Issue or Scribed. And then they use at the venue to add other things to it, like multimedia behind the scenes content, prompts for donations, all of those things. With the tool that we're building right now with Inside Guide that we're building with Mervish, yeah, it's designed with that in mind. It's designed for you to be able to manage ads, to be able to replicate, formats for programs from show to show, to, duplicate all these different types of content that you need or want. But yeah, so looking at, supporting the ads was a really big part of what we're doing with Inside Guide and that digital program service.
Perfect. That's all the questions we had. Did you want to add anything else, David, before I wrap it up?
No, next week we'll be sending out an email, a sponsored email through APAP that's going to talk about Inside Guide, and it'll have more information about that and our early adopter program that we'll be implementing.
Well, David, thank you so much. This was really helpful, and I really appreciate all the data that you showed here and just what a really good summary of 2020 and a lot of what we learned through this digital pivot we all went through. I want to thank everyone here who attended the event. We will have the recording up on our website in just a few days. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@apap365.org. Thank you so much.
The link to the slides is in the chat if you haven't seen it.
Yes, and I'll give everyone just a second to download the chat if they want to save that chat, and then we'll head out. Thank you so much, David.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it.